Hello, thanks for joining us back. This is Michael, KC9PHK, presenting you the 2022 to 2026 Technician Class Amateur Radio Question Pool for the United States. I'm presenting to you on behalf of 59 Radio. Be sure to subscribe so you're aware of any new videos and reviews that we've posted. This question pool begins on July the 1st, 2022 and goes to June 30th, 2026. And again, just a reminder that this is for license examination administered in the United States. First off, SubElement T1, covering the Commission's rules. 6 exam questions come from the 6 groups. There are a total of 67 questions. And just to recap this year, for this SubElement and all the technician class, we're just going to read the question and then provide the correct answer. We had a lot of complaints saying that previously they just wanted the answer and the question, not all of the answers read. Okay, first up, T1A, purpose and permissible use of the amateur radio service operator primary station license grant, meanings of basic terms used in FCC rules, interference, RACES rules, phonetics, and frequency coordinator. T1A01 says which of the following is part of the basis and the purpose of amateur radio service. Correct answer is C, advancing skills in the technical communication phases of the radio art. Now keep in mind that when you take your amateur radio exam, it's possible that, and very likely that, it will not be C, but it will be the same correct answer. They can't change the answer, they can just change the order in which it is listed. T1A02, which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States? The correct answer is C, the FCC. T1A03, what do the FCC rules state regarding the use of phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service? The answer is B, it is encouraged. T1A04, how many operator primary station license grants may be held by any one person? That answer is 1. T1A05, what proves that the FCC has issued an operator primary license grant? That answer is C. The license appears in the FCC ULS database. T1A06, what is the FCC Part 9.7 definition of a beacon? That answer is D, an amateur station transmitting communications for the purpose of observing propagation or related experimental activities. T1A07, what is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? The answer is an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers away above Earth's surface. T1A08, which of the following entities recommends transmit and receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? That answer is volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. Each state has their own frequency coordinator, which is who coordinates repeater setups. T1A09, who selects the frequency coordinator? The answer is amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. T1A10, what is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, also known as RACES? Answer is all of these choices are correct, so we'll go back and read them. A radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications. A radio service using amateur radio stations for emergency management or civil defense communications. Apparently that answer is duplicated. C, an emergency service using amateur operators certified by civil defense organizations as being enrolled in that organization. T1A11, when is willful interference to other amateur radio stations permitted? That answer is at no time. T1B covers frequency allocations, emission modes, spectrum sharing, transmissions near band edges, contacting the International Space Station, and power output. T1B01, which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operations by technician licensees? That answer is 28.300 MHz to 28.500 MHz. T1B02, which amateurs may contact the space station on VHF bands? Answer is any amateur holding a technician class or higher license. T1B03, which frequency is in the 6-meter amateur band? That answer is 52.525 MHz. T1B04, which amateur band includes 146.520 MHz? That is the 2-meter band. T1B05, how may amateurs use the 219 to 220 MHz segment of 1.25 meter band? That is for fixed digital message forwarding systems only. T1B06, on which HF bands does a technician class operator have phone privileges? Answer is 10-meter band only. T1B07, which of the following VHF UHF band segments are limited to CW only? That would be 50.0 MHz to 50.1 MHz and 144.0 MHz to 144.1 MHz. T1B08, how are U.S. amateurs restricted in segments of the bands where the amateur radio service is secondary? Answer is, U.S. amateurs may find non-amateur stations in those segments and must avoid interfering with them. T1B09, why should you not set your transmit frequency to be exactly at the edge of an amateur band or subband? And that answer is to allow for calibration error in the transmitter frequency display so that modulation sidebands do not extend beyond the band edge, to allow for transmitter frequency drift. So all of those are correct. T1B10, where may SSB phone be used in amateur radio bands above 50 MHz? That's in at least some segment of all of these bands. T1B11, what is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators in their HF band segments? And that would be A, 200 watts. T1B12, except for some specific restrictions, what is the maximum peak envelope power output for technician class operators using frequencies above 30 MHz? That answer is 1500 watts. T1C covers licensing, classes, sequential and vanity call sign systems, places where the amateur radio service is regulated by the FCC, name and address on FCC license database, terms, renewal, grace periods, maintaining mailing address, and international communications. T1C01 says, for which license classes are new license currently available from the FCC? And that answer is technician, general, and amateur extra. Those are the only current licenses being issued. T1C02 says, who may select a desired frequency or desired call sign under the vanity call sign rules? Any licensed amateur. T1C03, what types of international communications are an FCC licensed amateur radio station permitted to make? That answer is communications incidental to the purpose of the amateur radio service and remarks of a personal character. T1C04, what may happen if the FCC is unable to reach you by email? Previously, you had to keep your mailing address on file. Now they're changing that to email. And same situation. The answer is revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator license. So make sure your correct email address is on file with the FCC. T1C05, which of the following is a valid technician class call sign format? That answer is KF1XXX. T1C06, from which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? From any vessel or craft located in international waters and documented or registered in the United States. T1C07, which of the following can result in revocation of the station license or suspension of the operator's license? Failure to provide and maintain a correct email address with the FCC. T1C08, what is the normal term for an FCC-issued amateur radio license? That would be 10 years. Every 10 years you renew. T1C09, what is the grace period for renewal if an amateur license expires? That is 2 years. You're not allowed to operate during this grace period, but your license is still maintained with the FCC where you can renew it, but you're not allowed to transmit on amateur radio bands during that time. T1C10, how soon after passing the examination for your first amateur radio license may you transmit on the amateur radio bands? The answer is as soon as your operator station license grant appears in the FCC database. So depending on your testing group, you could have your license in just a few days if it shows up on the FCC's license database. Now, if you're upgrading from technician to another class, you're able to use those privileges as soon as you leave the test session after you've been issued the paperwork there. T1C11 says, if your license has expired and is still within the allowable grace period, may you continue to transmit on the amateur radio bands? The answer is no. You must wait until your license has been renewed. T1D says authorized and prohibited transmissions, communications with other countries, music, exchange of information with other services, indecent language, compensation for operating, retransmission of other amateur signals, encryption, sale of equipment, unidentified transmissions, and one-way transmission. T1D01, with which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications? And that is any country whose administration has notified the International Telecommunications Union, also known as ITU, that it objects to such communications. T1D02, under which of the following circumstances are one-way transmissions by an amateur station prohibited? That would be when broadcasting. T1D03, when is it permissible to transmit messages encoded to obscure their meaning? That's only when transmitting control commands to space stations or radio-controlled craft. T1D04, under what circumstance or conditions is an amateur station authorized to transmit music using a phone emission? That is when incidental to an authorized retransmission of a manned spacecraft communications. T1D05, when may amateur radio operators use their stations to notify other amateurs of the availability of equipment for sale or trade? When selling amateur radio equipment and not on a regular basis. T1D06, what, if any, are the restrictions concerning transmission of language that may be considered indecent or obscene? That answer is any such language is prohibited. T1D07, what types of amateur stations can automatically retransmit the signals of other amateur stations? That would be repeater, auxiliary, or space stations. T1D08, in which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? The answer is only when the communication is incidental to classroom instruction at an educational institution. T1D09, when may amateur stations transmit information in support of broadcasting, program production, or news gathering, assuming no other means is available? That's when such communications are directly related to the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. T1D10, how does the FCC define broadcasting for the amateur radio service? That would be transmissions intended for reception by the general public. T1D11, when may an amateur radio station, transmit without identifying on the air? The answer is when transmitting signals to control model craft. T1E covers the control operator. Eligibility: designating privileges, duties, location, required, control point, control types, automatic and remote. T1E01 says when man amateur station transmit without a control operator, and that is never. T1E02, who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station. That's only amateurs allowed to transmit on the satellite uplink frequency. Any amateur is allowed to transmit on the satellite uplink frequency. T1E03, who must designate the station control operator, and that is the station licensee. T1E04, what determines the transmitting frequency privileges of an amateur station? The class of the operator license held by the control operator. T1D05, what is an amateur station control point? That's the location at which the control operator function is performed. T1E06, when under normal circumstances may a technician class licensee be the control operator of a station operating in an amateur extra class band segment? That is at no time. T1E07, when the control operator is not the station licensee, who is responsible for the proper operation of that station? And that is the control operator and the station licensee. T1E08, which of the following is an example of automatic control? That would be repeater operation. T1E09, which of the following are required for remote control operation? The answer is all of the above, so the control operator must be at the control point. A control operator is required at all times, and the control operator must indirectly manipulate the controls. T1E10, which of the following is an example of remote control as defined in Part 9.7? That is operating the station over the Internet. T1E11, who does the FCC presume to be the control operator of an amateur station unless documentation to the contrary is in the station's records? And that would be the station licensee. T1F says station identification, repeaters, third-party communications, club stations, and FCC inspections. T1F01, when must the station and its records be available for FCC inspection? That's at any time upon request by an FCC representative. T1F02, how often must you identify your FCC assigned call sign when using tactical call signs such as race headquarters? At the end of each communication and every 10 minutes during the communications. T1F03, when are you required to transmit your assigned call sign? That is at least every 10 minutes during and at the end of a communication. T1F04, what language may you use for identification when operating in a phone subband? The answer is English. T1F05, what method of call sign identification is required for a station transmitting phone signals? Send the call sign using CW or phone emission. T1F06, which of the following self-assigned indicators are acceptable when using a phone transmission? All of these are correct. So KL7CC stroke W3, KL7CC slant W3, and KL7CC slash W3. T1F07, which of the following restrictions apply when a non-licensed person is allowed to speak to a foreign station using a station under the control of a licensed amateur operator? The answer is the foreign station must be in a country with which the U.S. has a third-party agreement. T1F08, what is the definition of third-party communications? That would be a message from a control operator to another amateur station control operator on behalf of another person. T1F09, what type of amateur station simultaneously retransmits the signal of another amateur station on a different channel or channels? That would be a repeater. T1F10, who is accountable if a repeater inadvertently retransmits communications that violate the FCC rules? The answer is the control operator of the originating station. T1F11, which of the following is a requirement for the issuance of a club station license grant? The club must have at least 4 members. And that will conclude SubElement T1. Join us for the further videos as we release the additional videos that cover the rest of the technician class slides. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already.